Miami, 1985. A crack house in a poor neighborhood on the south side of the city. 5 people inside, cooking, cutting, counting money. Just another night. A crew walks in. No masks, no hesitation. They don't ask for the product. They don't ask for the money. They don't ask for anything. They open fire. 5 bodies. On the floor, in the kitchen, in the hallway. Blood on every wall. The crew takes the product, takes the cash, steps over the bodies, gets in the car, drives away. When Miami-Dade detectives arrive, they find something that makes their blood run cold. The shooters didn't use pistols. They used military-grade automatic weapons, M16 rifles, the kind of firepower you see in a war zone, not a crack house in South Florida. And the detective assigned to the case, a tough Irish-American cop named Kevin Doherty, says something to his partner that changes the direction of the investigation. This wasn't a robbery, this was a message. The message came from a gang that most Americans had never heard of. They didn't come from New York, they didn't come from Los Angeles, they didn't come from Chicago. They came from a concrete housing project in Kingston, Jamaica. They called themselves the Shower Posse. Not because they showered people with money, not because they showered people with gifts, because they showered entire neighborhoods with bullets. And by the time law enforcement figured out what they were dealing with, 1,400 people were dead on American soil. The Crips never did that. The Bloods never did that. The Italian mob never did that. One Jamaican gang from one neighborhood left more bodies in America than any organization in the history of the country. And the most insane part? Their own government helped create them. To understand the Shower Posse, you have to understand Tivoli Gardens. Tivoli Gardens is a housing project in West Kingston, Jamaica. But calling it a housing project does not come close to describing what it really was. In the 1960s, a politician named Edward Seaga, leader of the Jamaica Labour Party, bulldozed a Rastafarian shanty town called Bacco Wall and built Tivoli Gardens on top of it. He filled the new community with his most loyal supporters, every family, every apartment, hand-picked. Tivoli Gardens was not housing, it was a fortress, a voting block, a military base disguised as a neighborhood. Seaga had invented something that would poison Jamaica for the next 4 decades, the garrison community. A neighborhood where one political party controlled everything, the housing, the gyps, the protection, and in exchange you voted the way they told you. The rival party, the People's National Party, saw what Seaga did and built their own garrisons, packed them with their supporters, armed them, and then the two sides went to war. The 1980 Jamaican election was the bloodiest in the country's history. Over 800 people were murdered. 800. In a country smaller than Connecticut, 3/4 of the dead were killed by gunmen from the garrisons. That election put Seaga in power, and it put the men who had killed for him in a position to collect. The most dangerous of those men lived in Tivoli Gardens. His name was Lester Lloyd Coke. They called him Jim Brown. Lester Lloyd Coke was born in Kingston. He was raised in Denham Town, a neighborhood controlled by the rival PNP. As a young man, he was a PNP enforcer, but at 19 he was shot and left for dead by his own people. JLP doctors from Tivoli Gardens saved his life. That betrayal and that rescue switched Coke's loyalty forever. He became Edward Seaga's most dangerous soldier, the man who controlled Tivoli Gardens through force, fear, and an understanding of violence that went beyond anything the politicians had planned for. After the 1980 election, Coke took over from the previous Don of Tivoli, Claude Massop, who had been killed in a police shootout in 1979. Coke became the new Don Dada, the Godfather, the untouchable. He used the money from the product trade and later cocaine, to feed the poor. He built community centers. He gave jobs. He settled disputes. He became a one-man government inside Tivoli Gardens. Police could not enter without his permission. Politicians came to him for favors. And Seaga himself called Coke a protector of Tivoli Gardens' poor. A politician calling a gang leader a protector. In public, on the record. That was Jamaica. But Jim Brown was not satisfied with Kingston because in the early 1980s something happened that changed the economics of Caribbean crime forever. Edward Seaga launched a program to destroy Jamaica's marijuana farms in exchange for American aid. Marijuana was one of Jamaica's biggest cash crops. Most of it went to America. When Seaga burned the fields, the traffickers did not stop trafficking. They just switched products. Jamaica sat perfectly between Colombia's Atlantic coast and South Florida. The Colombian cartels needed a transshipment point, and Jim Brown was happy to provide one. Cocaine replaced marijuana, and the money got bigger than anything Tivoli Gardens had ever seen. But the real money was not in Jamaica, it was in America. In the early 1980s, Jim Brown and his partner Vivian Blake made a decision that would change American crime forever. They sent their soldiers to the United States. Blake, privately educated, articulate, and strategic, set up the American operation. He started in Toronto, then New York, then Miami, then everywhere. New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Kansas City, Chicago, Newark, Camden, Atlantic City, Trenton, Bridgeton, East Orange, Irvington, cell by cell, city by city. The Shower Posse built a distribution network across the entire eastern seaboard and into the Midwest. And they brought something that American gangs had never seen before: total, absolute military-grade violence. The Crips and Bloods fought over corners. The Shower Posse did not fight over corners. They eliminated corners. If a rival crew was on a block, the Shower Posse did not negotiate, and they did not intimidate. They drove up and opened fire on everyone standing on the street. Everyone. Dealers, lookouts, bystanders, women. It did not matter. Showered with bullets. That is where the name came from. They shot up a packed Firemen's Benevolent Hall in Fort Lauderdale, wounding 3 and killing their target, a reggae DJ. They opened fire at a soccer match in Bunch Park, killing a professional soccer player named Colin Fowles. 5 people were murdered in a single crack house massacre in Miami. 2 posse hitmen tried to shoot their way out of a police sting in a warehouse. Both went down in a blaze of gunfire. And this was just Miami. In New York, in Philadelphia, in Kansas City, the same thing was happening. Different city, same playbook. Show up, shower, leave. By the late 1980s, law enforcement estimated the Shower Posse had murdered 1,400 people on American soil. 1,400. The Italian Mafia's most violent decade produced nothing close to that number. The Crips and Bloods combined did not match it. No American criminal organization in history had left that many bodies in that short a time. And it was all controlled from a pastel-colored housing project in Kingston that the police were afraid to enter. Now here's where this story goes from insane to unbelievable. In 1989, a former Shower Posse member named Charles Little Nut Miller was arrested for trafficking. He agreed to testify against gang leadership in exchange for immunity. In his testimony, where he admitted to 9 murders himself, Miller dropped a bomb. He said the Shower Posse had been trained, armed, and transported to the United States by the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. CIA. Miller described his connection to the Jamaica Labor Party as a political enforcer. He described how the American government had supported the JLP fight against the PCNP, which was seen as too close to Fidel Castro's Cuba during the Cold War. His exact words to the court were, "The United States made me what I am." The CIA had backed Edward Seaga's JLP. The JLP used garrison gangs like the Shower Posse as enforcers, and those same enforcers, armed and trained with CIA support, were now flooding American cities with crack cocaine and killing 1,400 Americans. The weapons that killed Americans in Miami crack houses may have been provided by the American government to fight communism in the Caribbean. Think about what that means. Jim Brown wasn't just violent in America. Back home in Kingston, he was even worse. In May 1984, Coke led a group of armed men from Tivoli Gardens into a nearby community called Wilton Gardens, known as Rima. Rima was technically a JLP neighborhood, but factions there were angry that the community was being neglected while Tivoli got everything. Jim Brown decided to teach them a lesson. 12 people were killed in what became known as the Rima massacre. An arrest warrant was issued. But Coke did not go to prison. He went to Miami. With an active arrest warrant in Jamaica, Jim Brown had no trouble boarding a plane to the United States. He set up shop in South Florida, betting on horse races at the Columbus Hotel, partying at clubs in Brooklyn, and running the American operation alongside Vivian Blake. He had been in America barely 6 weeks when he was robbed at a crack house. He was high on cocaine at the time. His response was another massacre. 5 people dead in one night. That was Jim Brown's answer to everything. You disrespect him, bodies fall. In 1987, under pressure from American authorities, Coke slipped back into Jamaica. He was arrested on the old Rima warrant, but the trial was a joke. Every witness disappeared. Not a single person showed up to testify. Jim Brown was acquitted. He told friends he was going to run against Edward Seaga for prime minister. A gang leader, acquitted of a massacre because witnesses were too afraid to testify, talking about becoming the leader of the country. That's how powerful the Shower Posse had become. And then there's this. December 3rd, 1976, 2 days before a massive peace concert organized by Bob Marley at the National Heroes Park in Kingston, 7 gunmen broke into Marley's home at 56 Hope Road. They opened fire. Bob Marley was shot in the arm and chest. His wife Rita was shot in the head. The bullet grazed her skull. His manager Don Taylor was hit by 5 bullets. All 3 survived. The Netflix documentary Remastered, Who Shot the Sheriff, identified Lester Lloyd Coke as present and participating in the attack on Bob Marley. The motivation was political. The PNP was trying to use Marley's concert as a party event. The JLP, through its enforcers, sent a message. They shot the most famous musician on the planet. And the man identified as being in the room was Jim Brown. In October 1988, a federal grand jury in Miami indicted 34 members of the Shower Posse. Jim Brown, Vivian Blake, Blake's 2 half-brothers, Errol Hussing and Tony Bruce, who ran the New York operation. All of them, 62 counts, RICO charges, trafficking, murder, the full weight of American law enforcement. The U.S. demanded extradition. Jim Brown was arrested in Kingston, and that is when the Shower Posse started to eat itself. While Jim Brown sat in a Kingston jail cell awaiting extradition, his son Mark Anthony Coke, known as Ja T, took over day-to-day operations. On February 2nd, 1992, Ja T was riding his motorcycle through downtown Kingston when gunmen from a rival crew called the Black Roses opened fire. Ja T was dead. The reprisals were immediate. 12 people were killed in Kingston over the next 2 weeks. Over 40,000 people attended Ja T's funeral. 40,000 for a 22-year-old gang member, and then, hours after the funeral, while the mourners were still changing out of their clothes, news broke from the general penitentiary. Lester Lloyd Coke was dead of fire in his cell the night before he was scheduled to be extradited to the United States. Officials called it an accident. Nobody in Jamaica believed that for a second. The most dangerous man on the island, the man who could testify about the CIA, about political connections, about decades of organized violence, was dead in a mysterious fire the night before he was supposed to leave the country. Jim Brown knew too much, and somebody made sure he never talked. Jim Brown's youngest son was 23 years old when his father burned to death in that cell. His name was Christopher Coke. His street name was Dudus. Dudus was nothing like his father. Where Jim Brown was loud, violent, and reckless, Dudus was quiet, contemplative, a strict vegetarian. He had attended one of Jamaica's elite private schools, Arden High School, alongside the children of politicians and business leaders. He took over the Shower Posse at 23, and he ran it differently. There was less violence on American streets and more business, more strategy. He installed surveillance cameras around Tivoli Gardens. He used technology that law enforcement did not have. He built community programs, feeding the poor, creating jobs, and setting up youth centers. He was so beloved in Tivoli Gardens that Jamaican police literally could not enter the neighborhood without the community's permission. His people called him the President. Graffiti appeared across Kingston. It read, "Jesus died for us. We will die for Dudus." For nearly 2 decades, from 1992 to 2010, Dudus ran the Shower Posse and Tivoli Gardens with a level of control that made his father's reign look like chaos. And the Americans could not touch him. It took U.S. prosecutors until 2009 to indict Coke, even though they cited crimes going back to 1994. They charged him with trafficking tons of cocaine and marijuana, plus firearms smuggling, but they could not directly link him to a single murder in the United States. Dudus had learned from his father's mistakes. He kept his distance. He kept it quiet. He kept it clean on paper. In 2009, the United States demanded that Jamaica extradite Dudus Coke to New York. The Prime Minister of Jamaica, Bruce Golding, a JLP politician, refused. For 9 months, the Prime Minister of an entire country protected a gang leader from American justice. He claimed the United States used illegal wiretaps to gather evidence. He stalled. He negotiated. He tried everything to keep Dudus in Jamaica. The Jamaican public was outraged, not because they wanted to protect Dudus, because they saw a prime minister protecting a drug lord at the expense of the country's reputation. On May 17, 2010, Golding relented. An arrest warrant was issued for Christopher Coke, and Tivoli Gardens went to war. Coke supporters armed themselves. They built barricades across the streets, concrete barriers, uprooted street lamps, anything they could find. They set fires. They opened fire on police. On May 24, 2010, the Jamaican government declared a state of emergency. 2,000 soldiers and police, the largest military mobilization in Jamaican history since independence, launched a full-scale assault on Tivoli Gardens. Urban warfare in a Caribbean capital in 2010. The battle lasted for days. Soldiers fought from building to building, snipers on rooftops. Automatic weapons fire echoed through the concrete corridors of the garrison. When it was over, 73 civilians were dead. Hundreds were injured. Entire blocks of apartments were riddled with bullet holes. Streets were destroyed. 73 people died so the government could arrest one man. And Dudus was not even there. For a month after the invasion, Christopher Coke was a ghost. He escaped Tivoli Gardens before the military arrived. He hid. He moved through safe houses. He planned. And then he tried to surrender on his own terms. Dudus contacted Reverend Al Miller, one of Jamaica's most influential evangelical pastors, and asked him to broker a surrender directly to the U.S. Embassy, not to the Jamaican police. Dudus believed, just like Larry Davis in the Bronx, just like George Wright in New Jersey, that if he surrendered to the local cops, he would never make it to a courtroom alive. On June 22, 2010, a car was stopped at a routine roadblock outside Kingston. Inside, a figure wearing a woman's wig, women's sunglasses, carrying a second wig. The most wanted man in the Caribbean was trying to reach the U.S. Embassy dressed as a woman. Security forces recognized him through the disguise. Christopher Dudus Coke, the president, was arrested in a wag. He was extradited to New York. He pleaded guilty to racketeering and assault in August 2011. He was sentenced to 23 years in federal prison in June 2012. Reverend Al Miller was arrested for trying to help him flee. Prime Minister Golding, the man who had protected Dudus for 9 months, resigned in disgrace. The Shower Posse started in one neighborhood, Tivoli Gardens, a concrete fortress built by a politician who wanted to win elections. From that one neighborhood, they spread to Miami, New York, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Kansas City, Chicago, Toronto, London. They helped drive the American crack epidemic. They left 1,400 bodies on American soil. They may have been armed by the CIA. Their founder may have shot Bob Marley. Their leader burned to death in a jail cell the night before he was supposed to talk. Their next leader's supporters built barricades and fought the Jamaican military in the streets. 73 civilians died in the operation to arrest one man. The prime minister who protected him resigned, and the man himself was caught in a wig trying to reach the U.S. Embassy. After Dudus was taken down, Jamaica's national homicide rate dropped by 32%. 32%. One gang, one arrest, 1/3 of a country's murders gone. That is how much damage the Shower Posse did. Not just to America, to their own country. Tivoli Gardens is still there. The bullet holes are still in the walls. The barricades have not all been cleared. The murals of the old Dons, Jim Brown, Ja T, and the soldiers who died in the 2010 invasion are still painted on the buildings. The Shower Posse was not a gang. It was a government within a government, armed by politicians, trained by the CIA, exported to America, and when it got too powerful, when the monster they created turned on its creators, it took an army to stop it. 1,400 bodies in America, 73 civilians killed in one operation, one man caught in a wig, and it all started in a pastel-colored housing project that the police were afraid to enter.